Hello and welcome. My name is Paul Brett and I am a Senior Software Support Analyst for the Transformation Extender product from IBM. Today's video is a walkthrough of getting the ITX launcher to trigger from an Oracle database. I encourage you to follow me on Twitter at PaulBrettIBM. Okay, so the first step to get Oracle triggering working is to execute the two scripts that are provided with the product to do just that. Here is the first of those two scripts. There are a few grunt statements that have to be executed as the sysdba. After that, the rest of the script can be executed as the user that is going to be using the launcher product. So let's start with these execute statements. I've copied them out onto another notepad and edited that to show the user that I'm going to be using. Going to be using the Scott user for the rest of the demonstration. So I'm going to copy all those to clipboard and switch to my virtual machine that has my Oracle installation. I'm going to start SQL Plus as sysdba. And I'm going to execute those grant statements. There we go. All of the grants have executed successfully. There are no further steps to do as sysdba, so I'm going to close this window. I'm now going to rerun SQL Plus, this time as the Scott user. I need to execute the rest of this script from the declare statement onwards as the Scott user. But before I do that, the instructions recommend that I set server output to on. So I shall do that now, set server output on. Okay, so the rest of the script starts from the word declare and goes all the way to the end of the file where it's got the end and the semicolon. I'm going to paste those into the window now. And to terminate the script and actually execute it, I need to enter a final / and press enter. Okay, there's a lot of information has been printed on screen, but none of them indicate any potential issues. It tells me that Scott has the required execute privileges, a few lines that say that, lots of lines saying that stuff has been created, and then at the very end, SQL procedure successfully completed. So that's the Oracle triggering script installed. That will enable row-based triggering. There's an additional script to install if you want column-based triggering to work. So I'm going to look at that now. Here is the script. Again, there's some text to tell you all about what it does and what to do. But this one is a lot more simple. I just have to copy from the declare statement to the end of the file to clipboard, and we'll paste that into our SQL Plus session. Again, it says SQL procedure successfully completed. We don't need that window at the moment for now, so we will close it. We'll close all these notepad files, we don't need any of those. And that is the Oracle database all set up, ready for triggering. The next step is to create some objects, a table object with some data in it that we're going to be triggering from. Here is the pre-created script I have. I am going to create this table called groups and insert these values into that table. So I need to have a SQL Plus session open again as the Scott user. I'm going to execute a drop statement first because the table already exists, and then I'm going to use the create statement here to create the table, and you get a table created statement that shows that everything is working perfectly. And finally we're going to execute these insert statements to get the data in. Okay. Lots of data inserted into the table. I'm going to commit my session, and then I'm just going to show you the content of the table. There we go. My table is created and ready to go with the default data already in it. Here we are on the Design Studio machine, and as you can see I have a File Explorer window open showing a mostly empty project folder. The createobjects.sql file I used earlier is here and nothing much else. Okay, so I'm going to open a command prompt and I'm going to change the path variable to point to my ITX10 installation, because I have multiple versions installed and I want to ensure that the tools that I start will be the correct versions. So the first tool I'm going to start is the Database Interface Designer. So I'll type db edit and we're going to create a new Database Interface Designer document. So I press Ctrl N for a new file and move down to Databases and press Ctrl D and start defining my database connection. With a nice simple name that I can remember. I will change the adapter to Oracle. In the connection string I will use the server and instance syntax to connect to the database, and finally I will add in my Scott user with the default Tiger password, and that's my database connection document ready. I can double click on the tables entry here and it will bring up a list of tables in the database. This is a quick way of confirming that I have all the connection details correct. So let's define a new query. Should call this query 1, and the query will select star from groups, which is the table we created earlier. I'm going to generate a type tree from that query. Change the name slightly. Query underscore groups.mtt. The directory is incorrect, so let's copy and paste that in there as well, because I do want it created in the correct place. And I click the OK button. We get a command completed successfully confirmation, a short summary in the window behind of the table and columns that were found, the 4 columns that I expected. I'm now going to save this Database Interface Designer document. I'm going to save it in my project directory and I'm going to call it database query file 1.mdq. And quit. Okay. In my File Explorer window you will note that I now have the MDQ file and I have the type tree that I imported. Okay, we're back in our project folder, and a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to delete some files that we don't need, some backups and temporary files that are created. So our directory now just contains our SQL script, our MDQ file and our type tree file. Next step is to create the actual map. So we'll fire up our Extender Studio now. Project 1 is the one I created earlier, which I shall refresh and then expand. The type tree is listed there. Time to create a new map source file. I'm going to call this map source test.mms and place it in project 1. I'm going to create a new map. I'm going to call it test 1. And then I'm going to add a new input card. My new card is going to be called in1. The type tree it's going to be using on input is the query type tree I generated earlier from the Database Interface Designer. From the object picker I select dbSelect for the object to use. The adapter I change to database, and I'm going to add -t to the command to get an adapter trace file. Final step to link this card to the actual database is to pick the MDQ from my list, and it automatically fills in the database for me. There's only one in there, so it's picked the only one that's there, and it's also only found one query, so it's picked that for me already as well. Okay, so if I run this map now, it will query the database and it will read the rows from the database and create a trace for me. However, I won't know what it's actually retrieved unless I also create an output card. Before I create the output card, I'm going to need some kind of blob type tree object to read the data into. So I'm going to do that now. New type tree. I'm going to call this type tree utility.mtt. I'm going to create one object called text item, and in the properties window I'm going to change that to an item. So that's a text item of variable width, length, so that's all ready to run now. I'm going to analyse the structure and logic of that tree and save it. Okay, so I have a utility type tree to use. Now time to create my output card. I'm going to call the output card out. Type tree I'm going to use is utility. Type tree object I'm going to use is text item. And I'm going to write to a file called output.txt. Okay, so if I were to drag the user ID across from the input to the output, it will basically give me one single row's worth of data, and within that row only one column worth of data. Now let's build and run this map now. Save, build, run. I've made a mistake in my map. This is actually a number item, so I am going to have to change this and add a function around the rule. Save, build, run. Okay, so the map completed successfully. We will open the output file. We will drag the content over to the right side of the screen until we get a split. And now we can see our output file, and it will live update each and every time we run this map. So as you can see, it's basically called out the first row and the first column, and that contains a number 1. And that's not a lot of good to us because we want to see the content of the entire table. So I'm going to drag the in1 object over to the output object, and then I'm going to insert a function, sorry. And the function I'm going to use is package. So I'm going to drag and drop that on top of the existing rule, and it will surround the in1. And then I will save, build and run. And on the output side you will see that it's updated and the complete content of the table has been retrieved. So this map is ready to run. Every time this map is run currently, through Design Studio, it retrieves the whole table, but we want it to be run under the launcher and to trigger every time there is certain changes done into the table, and defining that trigger is done back in the database interface designer, which is where we will be going next. For now, let's just quit the Design Studio. Okay, a bit more housekeeping now. I'll just move that to one side. As we can see, there are a few backup files and intermediary files that have been created whilst we've been working on this map, so I'm just going to remove all of those. We don't need any of them for the moment. And then I'm going to fire up my database editor again, database interface designer, and define the trigger. Okay, so right click on our query and choose define trigger. Actually, I've got to make a slight change to the query and add the username on the front. Okay, try that again, define trigger. Okay, so we have the row-based triggering option is available and it is currently ticked. I'm going to say that I want this map to trigger every time there is an update to the groups table or an insert into the groups table. and I'm not going to make any other changes. As I say, I'm going to leave the tick in the row-based triggering. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to save, and I'm going to close the Database Interface Designer. Okay, so the trigger has been defined, and that means I now need to recompile my map, which I am going to do at the command line because it's just quicker. The next step is to run the integration flow designer and design our system that is going to trigger this map and deploy it to a launcher. So here's the integration flow designer, and we are going to start a new document, and the first thing I'm going to do is save this document, and that's going to go into our project folder. And I'm going to just call it systems.msd. Okay, so I'm going to tell it to deploy to a local server, and what I want it to do is run a map which I shall define on the canvas now, test1.mmc. And in the launcher settings, I'm going to tell it I want it to run this map every time one of those triggers happens on the database. Okay, so the component has been designed. I'll just also add a quick deployment script to make things easier later on. I have no need to build and transfer the maps each time the map is in the correct location, and I'm going to build it manually using the mcompile every time I make a change. But I am going to get it to deploy the launcher control file for me. And this is going to need to go into my TX installation in the systems subdirectory. And system1.msl is as good a name as any, so I'm going to let it choose that. And I'm going to save, and then I'm going to double click to deploy that file, and it says it's successful, and I trust it, so I'm not going to look at the results, and I'm going to close down the integration flow designer. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping again. Because I rebuilt the map, an MME file has appeared, which I shall get rid of. A .back file is there, which I shall get rid of, and another .back file there, which again I don't need. So the system is ready to start, so I'm going to fire up a monitoring window first, and then call up the services applet of Windows. Let's spell that correctly. We're going to start the IBM Transformation Extender 10 launcher. Because the map is located as part of my profile, I've had to change the startup properties of the service to log on as me, but apart from that everything is basically as default. So I'm going to start the service now, and as you will note, the monitor window in the background has kicked into life. Now this window will now show me any action that happens to the trigger. I'll just move it up there out of the way for a moment. Okay, so this is now sitting waiting for the events that I've defined in the trigger to happen on the database, and then when that does happen, the output.txt file will be created in this window. So let's switch to our database machine, fire up a SQL Plus window and make one of those changes. Update groups set active equal y where name equals Paul. Let's move this window down just slightly so that we can see the results. Okay, one row has been updated, but nothing has happened in the DTXMon window above. That's fully expected because my commit hasn't happened yet on this window. So I now do the commit, and in the window above, hopefully you can see a tiny green dot that indicates a map has executed. In the window on the left, you can see that output.txt has been created. And if I open that file, you will note that the one row that was updated, username Paul, the active column has been changed to Y, as in active yes. Okay, I will close that output file for the moment, and I will make another update. Let's set another user. Let's set Jane to also be Y and commit. In this window, another green dot has appeared to indicate a map has executed, and in the output file you'll note that we've got Jane from the blue group has also been changed to Y. So let's insert a couple of records here. Insert into groups values. We are on record 10 now. I'm going to create a new group. I'm going to create the purple group, and in this purple group we're going to have a user called Dave, and he's going to be set to inactive for now. Also in the purple group I'm going to add Steve. You will note that even though I've run those two insert statements, oops, I made a mistake because I did not change the record number. Even though I've run those two statements, neither of them have produced a map execution, again because I haven't committed the changes. So if I just issue a commit now, you'll note that one map runs, and the output shows the two rows that have been committed in that update. That insert. Two new rows have been added, 10 and 11, Dave and Steve. In summary then, I demonstrated how to define a query trigger and deploy a map using that trigger to the ITX launcher, so that map is executed for defined database inserts and updates. I appreciate you taking the time to watch my video today. Assuming you found the content interesting and informative, please click the like button. Subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content covering ITX example usage and connectivity demonstrations. Thank you.